Welcome, everybody. Good morning. So I hope you're here for the right reason. This is Deep Dive Benefits of the Outdoors. And this is going to be by our very own education manager, Suzanne DeCoursey. Very happy to have her here. So for those who have not attended these virtual events that we're doing in spring, just some background that these are typically public events that we hold at the preserve. So either at our Sonoma Mountain Preserve called Oswald Preserve, or near Yorkville in Mendocino, our Galbraith Preserve.
Don?
Oh, I see somebody is chatting. Just want to make sure that it's not urgent.
What's up, Suzanne?
Okay, great. So before I let Suzanne take it away, I am going to just tell you a little bit about what the center does. So the Center for Environmental Inquiry is a resource to you, no matter who you are, whether you are affiliated with SSU or not, a student, a parent, a government employee, if you're a member of the public, an educator, or maybe you are working with an organization that's in need of environmental solutions. Any of those groups of people, we want you all involved, and the people I forgot to mention, because what we're doing is we're really envisioning a North Bay that's working together to find sustainable solutions. So we want to invite you to come be environmentally ready with us. And the way we're doing that is building this community of learners and problem solvers across all sectors of society. We want to make sure that you guys have firsthand experiences with the environment to understand that connection, and skill building experiences that result in sustainable solutions. Let's get you aware, prepared, and engaged. And that is really what our goals are and how we're going to do it. So there's lots of ways to get involved. There's public events like this. You can help lead or organize public events like this, engage with research, take one of our trainings like our naturalist program, which is open to students and community members alike, our land management training. There's also internships and student jobs. There's lots of data that you can access, and partner with us on projects. So the point is that you, all of you, are important in addressing the greatest environmental challenges that humans have ever faced. So thank you so much for coming today and being on this journey with us. Let me just tell you a little bit about what the day is going to look like. This is a pretty simple event format. So Suzanne is going to talk for about 45 minutes, and part of that time, she's actually going to ask for your feedback. So I want everyone to just quickly get familiar with the chat function, because she will ask you some questions, and there's going to be a piece where she actually asks you to get up out of your chair and go outside for just a minute. And if you can't do that, she'll give you some other options of what you can do. But do be prepared to move at that time when she asks you to. After that presentation, we'll have about 10 minutes for questions, discussion, sharing. A lot might come up during this time. So that's what we'll do then. And then always feel free to email me. I'm the one that sent you that registration confirmation, so you should have my email. And make sure to check out our other events at cei.sonoma.edu/calendar. So I think I mentioned, but not everyone was in the room yet, that I have muted everybody and kept your videos on. But if you could double check, I think there are some people who are not muted. I might go ahead and just do that for you. So I'm going to go ahead and make sure everyone's muted, but feel free and keep that video on. All right, if there is anything that comes up, like you can't hear Suzanne or there's an issue, just write it in the chat box and I'll be able to reply to you, but she's gonna stay focused on her talk. Okay, guys, thank you so much. And Suzanne, take it away.
Well, thank you, everyone. It's wonderful to see your faces, even digitally. I'm really excited to share a topic about which I'm super interested, which is the benefits of the outdoors. Because as Carrie mentioned, the Center for Environmental Inquiry, we basically exist to make sure that folks are environmentally ready, that we are moving forward to solve the environmental challenges of the North Bay. And you know, of course, we're all here because we think the environment is very important, and I think a lot of folks kind of just know that intuitively, but what are the actual benefits of the outdoors, not just for us collectively, but for us individually as humans? And just a little background about myself, I actually started out working for the National Park Service. That was the first position that I had after I got my undergraduate degree. I continued by getting work with the Nature Conservancy, and I thought, well, this is something that I'm really interested in, and I went back to graduate school and got a degree in ecology. So my main interest in this topic is because I spend time with people outside, and I spend time outside, and I, just started wondering, well, what's actually happening in people's brains and bodies? Like what are the actual benefits that people are getting? So I'd be really excited if folks are coming at this from any other, perspective, like especially neuroscience or neurobiology, because my background is coming from the practice end of things. And like I said, a lot of folks kind of, at this point, hopefully we're getting a sense of that, yes, the environment is very important for us, kind of in a plant, and, in terms of, the health of the planet and the health of our species. But there is actually a pretty significant body of literature now that has been looking at the benefits of individuals, the benefits of going outside for individuals. And I think some people think of nature, kind of we can take it or leave it, it's nice to have, but it's not super necessary. But, of course, as a species, we evolved outdoors. And nature is not, unfortunately, we have the language system that we have, and so I'm using the words that I have, but unfortunately, outdoors and outside, those are all outwards, right? It's out, it's separate from us. But of course, we know that nature is not outside of us. We're part of it. And I cannot possibly even get close to covering all the literature in an hour, less than an hour. But there is, at this point, quite a bit of observational evidence, much less experimental evidence. So, and some of it is more mixed, and, there's all those kind of difficulties with measuring something where there's lots of confounding variables. But I'll share some of what we know. And one of the most interesting things that I think is that some of the mechanisms are starting to be understood. So like what's actually happening, like what are the explanations for some of the effects that we see? And in terms of what kind of nature brings to us as individuals, one of those actually has to do with how we think. How does nature affect us in terms of our cognition and in terms of our learning? And I think when a lot of us think about learning, like if you're asked to visualize, okay, people learning, we picture this, folks sitting at desks and, learning in kind of a conventional way. I think that's a lot of our school experience looks quite a bit like this. But in terms of how we learn best, we know that it isn't so much that a teacher, directly puts knowledge into the head of a student, like Mr. Spock here, with a Vulcan mind meld. But a lot of it has to do with kind of what we observe, observational learning. So, and of course, this is the case with a lot of social mammals, including some of our close relatives. So you see in the picture on the right, you see the monkey being very interested in what it's found, and the other monkey looking very carefully because, of course, it's trying to figure out, okay, is this something I can learn from? So in terms of how we learn, that's a very important part of it. And we also know that the kind of the stickiest learning has to do with emotion. So if you're anything like me, I always kind of thought of learning as this intellectual process. I'm thinking about things very intellectually and very rationally. But if you think back to like your elementary school days, and I asked you who your friends were. You could probably, pretty easily remember them, maybe even share some things about them. But if I ask you to tell me what were some answers on a third grade test that you took, you probably couldn't really do it. I can't, the things that are important to us tend to be the things that stick with us, that we really learn. So emotion has a lot to do with how learning, kind of remains with us and sticks with us. And in terms of what the most optimal internal environment for that process is, there are a number of factors that go into this. This is like a tiny fraction of them, but it helps for it to be non-stressful. There's some productive stress, but if you're way too stressed, then it interferes with this process. And it helps to have some ability to reflect, to actually, absorb what you're doing. And in fact, if you actually, I'm curious about this, and so has anyone ever heard? I remember this floating around for a while, and you would kind of hear it. Has anyone ever heard the saying, "We only use 10% of our brains at any one time"? Okay, I see Carrie's nodding. I see some other folks nodding. Yes. So that I remember that saying floating around, and actually. It's interesting because for a long time, researchers didn't know what was happening when the brain was, quote unquote, not doing anything. And it's now understood that actually it's doing quite a bit. There's activity. And again, I'm using language that I have, which isn't like super accurate, but it's kind of mulling things over. You're doing something else that's mulling things over. And you might have even had this experience yourself. I know I have, where you're working on something. You're like sitting in front of your computer, like, oh my God, I can't figure this out. I'm working so hard. I'm trying really hard. I can't do it. I get up and I go for a walk, and boom, it just comes to me. And essentially, that's part of what's happening is that your brain is essentially working on things, and those flashes of insight can come about when you're in that kind of internal environment. And of course, one of the best ways to create that internal environment is with your external environment. And one of the easiest ways to create that internal environment is by going outside, because there's so much about nature that just kind of puts us into a really receptive state to learn. So for one thing, we know that engaging all your senses. So, you go outside and you don't even have to think about it. It just happens. You look around, there's smells, there's sounds. You do end up in this productively relaxed state. And I'll talk a little bit about what might be happening in your body when that happens. There's obviously tons of opportunities for reflection. You can move around, you can observe. And this state has actually been associated with improved self-regulation in children. So kind of behavioral issues that might interfere with learning, when you're outside, those tend to be quite damped down. And so all of this is really helpful for learning. Obviously, engaging multiple senses is a really helpful thing to do to kind of, again, get that information kind of sticky, and in terms of what you're actually experiencing, it's interesting how different it is outside. Even if you think, okay, well, like you could do this, you could create a multisensory environment inside, and you can, but there's certain aspects of being outside that are really helpful and hard to reproduce. And a strangely important one that I honestly didn't think about at all is distance. So basically being able to look out, and when you're inside, obviously, like your vision stops at some point. When you're outside, it just goes until you reach the horizon. And that seems to be important not only for learning and for kind of the way our brain makes sense of things, but even for like the development of our eyesight. And sounds too, there's such a rich soundscape in the natural world that you know, you can reproduce in different ways, but you know, you can also go outside and get it for free. and I don't know if anyone has had this experience. I certainly have. I'll be inside and I won't notice smell at all. I'm just even not thinking about it. I walk outside and all of a sudden it's like I get a new sense. It just kind of smacks me in the face. And I'm like, oh yes, smells exist, you know. So all of that is there and really, you know, brings our attention to it. And the other thing that it can do is it increases, it can increase motivational observation. And again, you can see this in yourself or even especially in kids. You take a kid outside. You know, maybe this is a kid who you cannot get them to focus, you know, like they're, you know, like you try to make them look at reading or whatever, and they're just all over the place. You bring them outside and they're like staring at a bug for, you know, tens of minutes at a time. They're just like so focused on it. So the motivation to look closely at things is something that can kind of come up when you're in the outside world. And it also helps that you can, again, like you have this whole world that just kind of comes into your senses. If you essentially allow for just kind of general observation in nature, then people will notice a lot more. And I'm not going to spend a ton of time talking about this because of our time constraints, but if anyone's heard the phrase inattentional blindness, basically there are tests you can take online, Google it, look it up, take some tests, and you will be shocked at how much you don't notice. If you are outside in nature, especially if you're doing observational and non-directed tasks, then inattentional blindness tends to go down. So in other words, you notice more, you take in more. And you know, this obviously works very closely with curiosity, and curiosity is another one of those things that I think some people are like, oh, it's great if you have it. It's not, you know, it's not like a gift. It's not like being gifted at math, you know, but actually curiosity has been correlated with some really interesting things. One of those is, especially for folks who are coming from a more disadvantaged environment, if people show high scores on a test of curiosity, but they don't have other, what we would consider intellectual gifts, you know, gifts in math, gifts in reading, they tend to still do better in life and in school. So curiosity itself is a form of giftedness. And of course, bringing people outside is one of the best ways to kind of foster that curiosity. Curiosity, and this is super new research, and so I don't know if it'll hold up, but there's some suggestions that curiosity might even make someone less politically polarized, because if you think about it, if someone's curious, they're interested in finding things out, even things that don't correspond with what they already know. You want to know things that you don't know, right? If you're curious, that's what you want to do. So this is a very powerful part of being human, and learning and moving through the world as being human. And nature is a great way to foster all of that. And if you can kind of recall your experiences of being outside, it's not a demand on your attention the way that your smartphone is. So it's sometimes called soft attention. Nature produces soft attention because you notice things, you see a lot, you observe a lot, you experience a lot, but it's not that kind of, you know, hard, your attention is being demanded. It's a process that seems to restore, it's sometimes called attention restoration. So it restores your attention, and it's even been associated with improved working memory. So more kind of room in your brain to hold information while you're doing short tasks, like for instance, mentally adding together multi-digit numbers. And of course, I already talked about the flashes of insight that you can get in this state. So being outside is also associated with reflection and inspiration. So talking about that kind of soft attention, leads me to the benefits that the outdoors have on mental and physical health. Because if I think a lot of people are here because you like being outside. You know, this is an experience that you might have had yourself. And if you can kind of you know, call up that experience in your mind, I always kind of feel like immediately relaxed. It seems, just even in my experience, it seems like being outside is helpful for mental and physical health. And there is some evidence that that being outside is good for your heart. There have been some longitudinal twin studies on this, so there actually is some experimental evidence, but some of it is mixed. So this isn't one of those real straight lines. But there is evidence that the being outside basically, you know, lowers your heart rate, makes it less variable, and lowers your blood pressure. And there's some very interesting experimental evidence about basically that exercising outdoors can be even more beneficial than exercising indoors, because, you know, you might look at this and say, well, you know, of course being outside would be helpful for your heart because, like, you go and exercise outside. But if that were the case, if there were no other factor, then you would think that exercise would be the same in either place, indoors or outdoors. And as it is, it looks like it's actually better for you outside, that that you have fewer inflammatory responses, and that you have all of this kind of lower heart rate variability is enhanced if you go outside. And just in general, speaking of physical activity, there's actually quite a lot of good evidence that being outside makes you want to be more physically active. So you just tend to be more physically active, which is already good for you. Outside, which is already good for you. So you kind of get the synergistic effect as well. And this is something that I am very concerned about nowadays. Obviously, all of us are very concerned about this nowadays. Being outside seems to be it correlated with improved immune function. So we know that all those microorganisms that, for the most part, are very healthy for us are, you know, like there's tons of healthy microorganisms outside that we get exposed to, and if you spend a lot of time outdoors, especially as a child, your microbiome diversity tends to be higher. So that's certainly correlated with good immune health. And in general, there's been a lot of interesting work on being outside and cortisol, the stress hormone, in that not just being outside, but even seeing pictures of nature. If you give someone kind of a stressor, you know, like you know, kind of an unpleasant video or, you know, loud noise, and then you show them either pictures of nature or pictures of a neutral scene, they'll return to physiological baseline faster after seeing a picture of nature. So just kind of general stress relief and relaxation. I mentioned I would talk a little bit about what's understood to be the mechanism behind that, and it seems to be that being outside, or even just like looking at pictures of nature, activates your parasympathetic nervous system. So all those parts of your nervous system that are designed to, you know, calm you down, not arouse you, but, you know, calm you down. And there is also a little bit of experimental evidence. I don't think there's a ton right now, that being outside also reduces inflammation. And of course, that's something that we hear a lot about now with COVID-19, a worry that many people's immune systems might overreact to the virus and cause essentially an inflammatory storm that can cause a lot of damage. And being outside seems to damp that down a bit. And there's actually quite a bit of evidence around being outside in mental health. So I already talked a bit about kind of stress and anxiety, depression, but there's a couple of things that I learned that I found really interesting, which was that again, exercise is so good for you. So how much of this is exercise just by itself, and how much of this is specifically being outside? And there has been some work done on that, where folks have either exercised inside or outside, and then had their brains imaged. And the folks who exercised outside had less activity in parts of their brains that are associated with mood disorders. So again, these are the experimental evidence is, like the numbers aren't super huge, and a lot more work needs to be done, but they're like tantalizing tidbits, like, okay, something is, interesting is really going on. And I talked to a person or emailed with a person before today who was asking about evidence for, for health effects of kids being outside. And she was she's a gardener. And this was something that I found really interesting. There's recently been a soil bacterium identified. So gardening, of course, brings you right up close to that. You're breathing it in. Called Mycobacterium vacci. And Mycobacterium vacci seems to have antidepressant effects. So you're literally breathing in something that acts as an antidepressant in the human body, which now every time I go outside and I smell the earth, I'm like, oh, good, I'm getting my dose of antidepressant for the day. So I've just talked a lot at you. And so now we actually get a chance to test this ourselves. So this is where if you have the opportunity to get up and go outside, this is where you can do it. But I'll give you, like Carrie said, I'll give you a few other options, because I know not everyone can necessarily go outside now. So first, for our contrast, I would normally at this point in the presentation have a bunch of slides with indoor environments, but we don't need those. We've been stuck inside so much. You just kind of your baseline state. So if you could take just a couple of minutes, if you can get up and walk briefly outside, please do it. If that would be too difficult, if you can look out a window, that will also, bring up something. So go ahead and get up and do that. Take 2 minutes and come back here, and we'll talk about the contrast and what you feel. Hello, everyone. Welcome back to the boring inside. So first of all, I am jealous. I saw some wonderful environments that people were in. Mark, I'm looking at you. That was phenomenal. Yep. I'm going to ask you to write a little bit about what came up for you in terms of you know, levels of relaxation, levels of stress, what you noticed, what you experienced in the chat box, and Carrie's going to keep track of that. I do want to move on now, just in the interest of time, and we'll circle back around to that at the end of the Q&A. But if you're anything like me, then you know I notice a big effect in terms of the difference between inside and outside environments. And we do know that this can also help protect our health as we age. The correlations here are a lot more kind of like, you know, transitive, like nature does this, and this is the problem in this disease, so like therefore, you know, so a lot more research needs to be done on this. But we do know that in terms of what we see in diseases of aging, especially those that affect the brain, there's evidence that being outside, especially active outside, can be protective against those diseases, and just in general make you feel better. So self-reported happiness, or you know, just well-being tends to go up when folks are outside. And in general, that can just bring you a sense of wellness. So I'm sorry with what's happened to the word wellness recently, because I feel like it's started to mean, you know, like, oh, you know, woo woo, you buy things from, you know, a shop to make yourself feel better. But that general sense of well-being, I think we all have an intuitive idea of what that is, and that seems to really be very affected by our experiences outside. And what's interesting about this is, so I mentioned that there's a lot of, in terms of the research, there's a lot of confounding factors. It can be hard to separate things out. You know, is it because you're active? Is it because of this or that? Is it because there's less air pollution if you're out in a green space as opposed to out, you know, in an urban environment? And I think it is important to think of those confounding variables and try to tease them out. But it's also important to look at the synergistic effects too. You know, like, you know, maybe there isn't one magic, you know, thing about nature. Maybe it's all of these working together, and that those can be both confounding, but also they can all work together. So in that respect, you know, that's even better. You know, nature brings us even more things. One of the things that I was kind of most interested in when I was looking at this literature was how experiences outside can help us connect with each other. That was not something I expected. I mean, I didn't go out. I kind of thought, oh, nature can make you feel better. Nature, you know, can help your health. Nature can help you learn, because those are all things I've observed. I didn't really think about the fact that there is some literature on how nature can actually help connect people. And one of the ways that it can happen is essentially it takes you out of yourself. And those experiences have been associated with kind of having a different perspective on your life. They've been associated with mental health. And also, remember I talked about the parasympathetic activation of going outside. Parasympathetic activation has also been associated with all these things too. And in fact, people in whom these experiences were induced experimentally seemed to develop more of a sense of openness, at least during the time of the experiment, and would do things like recognize knowledge gaps and seek out science knowledge that didn't conform with what they already knew. So the reason that you might recognize this picture from being a little bit before in the presentation, because all of those have been associated with less political polarization. So again, kind of taking you out of what you already know, out of yourself. and being more comfortable with things that you don't know, people that you don't know, and ambiguity. And the other thing that is just really interesting, which again I don't know if I would have necessarily articulated it to myself, but when I think back to times that I've spent out in nature, it's like time expands. And again, this has actually been demonstrated experimentally, where people were, had these experiences kind of induced in them, and suddenly a lot of pro-social behavior kind of comes up. People are more interested in volunteering, feel more satisfied with their own lives, and this is what kind of surprised me, because we're in such a time compressed society. Like, you always feel like there's never enough time to do anything. Well, folks would go out and suddenly report that they felt like they had more time. And nothing changed objectively. They had as much time as they did before, but the feeling was that there's enough time, and so those experiences again seem to be correlated with just being more satisfied and having greater mental health. And also in general, again, being connected not just to other people, but to a whole, suddenly part of something larger. And this was not correlated with, by the way, with like religiosity. This wasn't, this had to do with having these experiences. It didn't have to do with kind of what we think of as traditional religion. People who consider themselves religious were no more or less to have these types of reactions. In fact, some folks in whom these states were induced experimentally then played like an economic game where you could either give away, money, or you could like keep money, and people were more generous. Again, with that kind of identification with the planet, with humanity, with being part of a larger whole. And this quote is actually used entirely differently. By the way, if any of you recognize it, it says William Shakespeare, but it's actually a Shakespeare character, and he's using it differently. He doesn't mean nature the way that we mean nature. But when I ran into this quote, I thought, well, this is one of those that actually is quite apt, whether or not it was used that way originally. One touch of nature makes the whole world kin. So that's kind of what I was referring to a bit earlier. It's interesting, again, that it's sometimes called self-diminishment, or the small self, which all sounds bad, right? Like, oh no, myself is even smaller than it was, like, like there's even less of me. But I think a lot of you have had those experiences when you do feel kind of your own self feels smaller, but you also, because you feel like a part of everything else, it's a very, in my case, it's a very pleasurable feeling. Again, in some of the work that's been done, people who reported that they were compassionate, like, this is self-report. I'm not saying like, oh, they were lying, but like, it's self-reporting. They were compassionate. And then people who self-reported that they were prone to these experiences, or they had these experiences, the folks who were having these, the ability to go outside and have these, what are sometimes called self-transcendent experiences, actually demonstrated more generous and pro-social behavior than people who reported that they were compassionate. So again, it seems to be this sense of, we're part of something larger than ourselves, and natural experiences seem to be one of the most, one of the easiest ways to induce these in people. You could even, if you have kids, or if you've been around kids, you can even see this yourself. You're inside. Okay, you have to use your inside voice. You have to be quiet. You can't jump on the furniture. You go outside, and like the kids, like you can talk more loudly. You can social boundaries expand, and that has been shown experimentally with essentially having people inside and having people outside. So both a greater concern with others, generosity toward others, connection with something larger, and also more loose social boundaries. This is a quote that I really like, because again, it harkens back to that. The forest makes your heart gentle. You become one with it. No place for greed or anger there. And certainly when I go outside and I have these experiences, it's like, yeah, I don't even really have the language for it. You know, it's just the things look differently to me. And that seems to be something that happens in general with human beings in these natural environments. So by this time, hopefully you're thinking, well, the outdoors is great. You know, you might have known that intuitively anyway, but you know, like now, okay, there's actually been some work on this. So what happens if we can't go outside? I'm going to go kind of quickly through these slides, because essentially it's just kind of like the inverse of what I was just saying. Some of you might have heard nature deficit disorder. Basically, lack of being able to have experiences in nature is correlated with all kinds of things that you don't like to see, especially in kids. And of course, it's also been correlated with caring less about environmental problems. There's a large body of literature about how especially early experiences in the natural world are correlated with responsible environmental behavior as people get older. And just lots of literature on that. And the reason I threw this in is because I always like to say, you're never too old to have nature deficit disorder. So please, you know, it needs continuing treatment. You know, continue to go outside and have those experiences. And part of why we want to make sure that people are aware of the individuals of the benefits of the outdoors, both as a whole, you know, for our planet, for our species, and individually, is because we are we're encountering some of the biggest environmental challenges that our species has ever faced, like Carrie mentioned. And you know, I put these up even before this latest challenge. So pandemics and loss of biodiversity that has been associated with greater pandemics or more possibilities of diseases crossing over from animals to people, habitat loss, all of that is, you know, we're seeing it now. And that's and for that reason, the center really wants to create this environmentally ready society so that we can all move forward with the skills and the knowledge that we need to address these problems. We know that that we're actually not ready right now. Fewer and fewer people of all ages really get a chance to have experiences outside. We know that people don't have a lot of basic environmental information. We know that a lot of universities and schools don't require environmental classes, even though we know that no matter what your degree you get, no matter what your background, we're all going to have to move together to solve these problems. So we all really need that environmental knowledge. And so Carrie talked a lot about this at the beginning, so I won't go through it all, but you know, that's basically why we exist and what we try to provide. And part of the reason why we're doing that is, we are just encountering a lot of issues, even in our own area. You know, we've all gone through a couple of really challenging wildfire years in the last few years. We know that fires are more common, and because of that, at our Osborne Preserve, we're part of the Wildfire Alert Network. You can go on our website and actually look at the camera. And that is obviously there to keep track of wildfires, but it's also kind of cool just to see a camera from the top of Sonoma Mountain or from near the top of Sonoma Mountain. This is an issue close to my heart because I have asthma, and we know that having asthma is an underlying condition that can make infection with COVID-19 more challenging, and asthma rates are going up. So we actually had students work on designing a low-cost air quality monitoring station, which is now installed at Rohnert Park City Hall. So that's something that SSU students working with the center have been working on. Of course, as the education manager, this is what I find the most fun and interesting in what I do. So we also try to provide environmental education we do focus on grades 3rd through 5th, but it's really for everybody. You know, our SSU students and our naturalists get educated themselves, and then they can share what they know with others. And like I said, all of this is made so much easier because nature is such a great teacher. In fact, it's almost too easy. You know, you're just bringing people outside you've learned about all those benefits, and so rolling that into our education has been really, really helpful. And so in terms of how we want folks to kind of be involved with the center, like Carrie said, there's lots of different ways to do that. Now that you know about the benefits of the outdoors too, you know, you can spread the word to folks, like let people know, you know, nature isn't the frou-frou add-on thing, you know, it's really central to who we are. So there are different ways to get involved, as Carrie mentioned earlier. You all visited our website to register, so, you know, continue to check back there for different opportunities and ways to get involved, and just different ways to like keep ourselves as sane as possible during this time, and as connected to nature and each other during this time as we can. So thank you all. And I want to thank you again for the people who are still outside, because I've been enjoying watching people like be outside and walk their dogs. So thank you. That's been fun for me. And I'm happy to answer any questions that there are. And Carrie, I know too that you were keeping track of people's what people were writing in the chat box in terms of responses for the contrast between being inside and being outside.
So I think at this point, everyone, we have a few enough people where we can just unmute ourselves. If you have anything to ask, you can say, I have a question. But I do want to say a few things that I was hearing in the chat. So I think you covered this quite well, but there was some interest in children and being outside and learning in nature. And Patricia, I hope it's okay. I say that's your question because I want to make sure there was nothing else that you were wondering about that Suzanne did not address. Is there anything else in particular you were hoping to hear?
No, I was mostly really interested too in the research. You know, you mentioned many studies and things, and I was wondering if you had others that are particular to children and nature, or you know, sort of our philosophy about why should we teach children, why should we encourage children to be outdoors. But you did cover a lot of that, and you know, I'm good.
Great.
So just to share some of the thoughts people had, I thought these were really great. So when people went outside, here are some of their reactions. An envelope of calm and sweet aroma of peace. Watching this
Beautiful.
while I'm outside. So some people were already outside like me. I was pleasantly distracted by the birds chirping.
Mm.
So many bumblebees in my purple-robed locust tree. I felt my eyes searching high and low and noticing the colors and sounds. I also felt my shoulders relax and felt gratitude. I moved my laptop outdoors, so I'm now sitting with the bees and the birds. Someone remarked on how sad the stats are. Being outdoors makes the mind much more open and receptive to learning.
Mm-hmm.
And somebody asked about the presentation, if it will be available. And yes, we are recording this and it will be posted at the event website. Hopefully by next week, I'll figure out how to do that. So you can share this with others. And then I just noticed a few things myself, Suzanne. You know, I've seen you give talks like this before, but every single time I hear something that somehow passed me by. And today, two things stood out to me when you had us do outside experience. One, like you said, you didn't smell things until you walked outside. I went and stood over there, like in that sunbeam. And the thing I noticed was like this wave of sun heat on my face, which is something that you don't feel inside, right? And it's like you turn your back, now it's your back that's warm, like that kind of temperature on different parts of you. And then another thing was the distance. Like it's funny because I've been talking to my family about that. Like, let's go outside and like, let's look as far as you can for 20 seconds. It's like one of those ergonomic things that people have you do for your eyesight. But I feel like it is so much more impactful. And I purposely did that when you had us go outside, and it made a difference. So those are all my thoughts, and everybody in the chat section, but I'm sure people might have some other reactions if they want to share out loud, or if you're shy, you can type it.
Well, I would like to just mention, I don't know if any of you have done it's sometimes called a group poem.
Mm-hmm. Suzanne, I think my internet just froze. Hopefully everyone is still on. Uh-oh.
Very good. I like that. Thank you.
Sorry,
Sure.
guys. My internet went down for a moment, so I didn't hear what just happened the last 2 minutes. I'm glad it is still on.
Well, Patty was just piggybacking on what you were saying about distance and how important, because a lot of us have felt really closed in lately, you know, with everything that's going on. And I do want to say that there is an interesting, some of you may have heard this before, but incidences of nearsightedness in industrial societies have increased insanely, incredibly. Rates are up to 90% in places like Taiwan, and there have been there's been a lot of interest in what's happening. You know, why is that the case? Is it because people are reading a lot more? Is it because they're looking at screens? And one of the hypotheses for which there's quite a bit of evidence now is lack of exposure to outside environments, both distance and natural light. There seems to be some developmental path that's triggered by having those experiences. And if you stay inside, your eye just never really quite figures it out. Because obviously, if something's changing that fast in less than 100 years, it's probably not, genetic. It's not straight genetic. There's some kind of, epigenetic or environmental, component to it. And so even just eye development in people seems to be, really helped by having that distance, having that light. And outside light is very different from inside light.
Someone mentions that that's why they were so concerned when Sonoma County closed the parks and beaches.
Mm-hmm. Yes, going outside, and I didn't touch on this. There's so much, in the literature. It's hard to get to it all. But yes, being outside is so good for people. I'm glad that even though beaches and parks are closed, I'm glad that we go outside and we try to do as much as we can just outside in our neighborhoods. But being outside, I don't know that the virus that causes COVID-19 has been tested yet, but generally speaking, human pathogens don't do well with natural light. In fact, sunlight kills a lot of human pathogens even more readily than UV light does. So being outside is just helpful in all kinds of ways, not just for our own, personal health, but even for dispersing pathogens, maybe even killing pathogens. I don't want to talk too out of turn with this because I've this is not even remotely my area of expertise, in terms of like medicine and studying pathogens, but I've heard some doctors say that it would actually be very hard unless you were standing quite close to someone, definitely within 6 feet, to be infected by another person if you're outside. That being outside, because the air is moving, and especially if you're staying 6 feet away, is actually fine for your health, and we know good for your health in other ways.
Well, it sounds like they might be opening up parks. There may be an announcement coming soon about it, limited opening, which would be nice. I do think I do think the very thing that can help heal us is the thing that they took away, which is nature,
Mm.
Yeah, that's a very interesting point. This is my dog Miley. And my name is Sonia. I'm a student. I go to Sonoma State University, where it's taking place, obviously. And I wanted to say that this talk was so inspiring for me. And this talk was so inspiring for me. My grandpa, he passed away a couple of years ago, and he used to walk 2 miles every day around the same area that I walk now. And I dealt with a lot of depression, and then until I started walking a few weeks ago, I've noticed tremendous improvement with my walks with my dog, and I didn't know why until I came to this talk, and I found it so inspiring. So thank you for bringing all this awareness to me. So thank you. I learned a lot.
Thank you so much for joining us.
That's so
and
great.
Thank you for I was going to say thank you for walking your dog too, because I really enjoyed, like, I can just see little video images of people, and I was like, this is great. I'm giving this talk, and I'm inside my car, because that's kind of where I where I get the signal. But I get to watch this lovely walk with this very, very friendly looking dog. So.
Thank you. She's my best friend.
Yep, I can relate to that. Mine's sitting at the floor, on the floor right now.
Well, everybody, it is actually already 11:01, amazingly. So it feels like we filled that time just perfectly. If anyone has anything else to say, I think Suzanne has said she can stay a few minutes after if anyone would like to stay on the call. But before we do that, I just want to wrap up with a couple really quick things. Just reminding you, you can reach out to me for any reason, questions, comments, concerns, ideas, collaborations. I'm here to hear all of that, and I would really love to hear back from you. My email is what you should have received when you registered. So I hope you feel a little bit more empowered. I hope that you feel a little bit more inspired even than you were before to get outside. And I just want to tell you about a few other events coming up, because this is just one of over 24 that we have this spring. It's just really, we've gotten so many wonderful people to come help us provide these programs for you all. So tomorrow is the next in our Citizen Science Primer. So this is a primer of 6 different events every Friday at 2 p.m. This is the 3rd one. And this one is going to be about dragonflies. And our really fantastic partner, Kevin Monroe, who works with Nature Conservancy in New York, is leading it. So that's one opportunity we have with these virtual spaces, to have a leader from New York. And he will teach us about dragonfly habitat, what they do, how to find them, and we'll go through an activity outside like we did with Suzanne, but it's going to be a longer activity, 10 to 15 minutes to engage. Then on Sunday, we have an event on camera traps and research and management. So this is a deep dive. It's about how managers, researchers have been using these wildlife cameras. And then there's a follow-up event to that all the way in May on the 16th about how homeowners, landowners, people who are just you know, interested in what wildlife cameras might show them. Maybe it's what pests, you know, what animals are coming in your vineyards, or who's sneaking by your house at night that you're wondering about. It could be any of those reasons. So that's a citizen science event coming up then. And then next Tuesday is a deep dive into historical ecology, which is a really fascinating topic, talking about how our local landscapes have been really deeply informed by the relationship with humans and culture. We have another Learn with a Naturalist event, which some of you who are involved in our Osborne programs, this is actually by one of our naturalists talking about our connection to Sonoma Mountain. And then one day after that is a really exciting citizen science event by our nature tech lead, Chris Hawley. And this is really timely for Earth Week because it's about climate change and what you can do. It's about personal action and a citizen science phone app that you can use to make that happen. So the last one I want to talk about is the Sudden Oak Death Blitz. And the reason I want to bring that up now, even though it's not happening till the beginning of May, is things are different this year, clearly. And instead of having the in-person meetings and trainings and dropping off packets, everything's by mail and online. And in order to get you the materials in time, you have to register by tomorrow. So we need you to register by tomorrow, and that way we can mail you the collection information and you can test your bay and tan oak tree leaves for that sudden oak death pathogen for free through UC Berkeley. So it's a really rare opportunity. So those are all, there's many other events. Those are just a sampling. We hope to keep doing these into June. As long as people are stuck inside, we would love to be providing these opportunities for you all. And there are more being announced on a weekly basis. So that's all I have to say. I'm gonna let Suzanne stay a little bit more for other questions. But again, I wanna thank you all so much for coming. Stay safe.
Thank you.
In your way.
Can I ask a really question? How do you sign up for that?
Oh, great idea. So all of these can be found at cei.sonoma.edu, and it's in our calendar. And then if you click on each event, at the bottom of that page is a register button.
CEI.
And you do have to register because that's how you get the Zoom credentials, and they're different for every meeting. So it is important to register.
Okay, thank you.
Thank you. So, anything for Suzanne? And I do see some participants are dropping off, which makes sense because it's after 11. So we're kind of a smaller crowd now. If you're shyer, that might help you speak up.
I do have a practical question. I noticed I didn't get a chance to really look thoroughly through your website, but it looked like there's availability to host small events at a couple of your sites. Is that true, or are those only events that you're hosting, like education events, or can groups come and do some type of like trainings, customized training?
So I do the outreach events, and actually Suzanne is the person in charge of groups that might come up to use it for their purposes for research, education, and the like. So Suzanne, do you want to answer that more?
Absolutely. So the short answer is absolutely. That would be wonderful. The slightly longer answer is that so the SSU campus, of course, of which we are a part, right now is only available for folks who are considered essential personnel, like
Right.
a lot of other places.
Right.
So during this time, until we're past this time, we're not having groups right now, but
Sure.
But yes. And if you have any specific questions about dates or times or facilities, or you would like to just come up and see what we have available in terms of the building and parking and things like that, then you can just contact me, and I'm always happy to essentially bring people up and kind of show you what we have. So yes,
Great.
We absolutely love to have other groups come and use the facilities at the preserves.
Thank you. That sounds wonderful. I'll reach out, in a little down the road a little bit when we know when things are changing more. So Thank you. It's been really helpful and really we couldn't all get together to be on this one today together. And I
Well,
noticed
thank you so much for joining us.
I noticed you're sitting in your car.
Another background up because I'm like, well, do people really want to see the inside of my car? But
Well, I actually do. This is a background picture because I'm actually just sitting in my front porch, but the backgrounds are kind of fun. So
Mhm.
That one's convincing. I thought that was real.
well, it is. It's a school site with our fence. Have you ever seen or heard of fence weaving?
Oh, right. Wow.
Yeah. So
And the
it's
photograph.
it's a fence weaving. It's a photograph of fence weaving. Yeah. So. Well,
Creating.
thank you so much. I look forward to kind of reaching back with you guys in a bit. And I'm going to take a look at some of your some of the upcoming things you've got on your website.
Absolutely. Yep. And if you have other questions about what we can and can't partner with you on, reach out to any one of us. We'll direct you as needed if we
Great.
can.
Mhm.
All right. Well, thank you so much. Have a great day.
Thank you. You too.
So, Dad. Yes, I said that. Hey, Dad. He's the one right below. So he's out in Maryland right now. And when I went out for my 2 minutes to look at my nature, Suzanne said that apparently you showed the bay. Is that what you did? Did you walk out on the porch and show everyone the water? Oh, we can't hear you. We can't hear you, so your mic must be off. Let me try to unmute you. Oh, there we are. Can you talk now?
Test 1, 2, 3.
Yes.
Okay. Yeah. Luckily, my backyard happens to be saltwater and a marsh. So as per Suzanne's, her backyard is pretty good too. So just before this meeting, I went out and kayaked for about an hour over to a sandy beach and sat on the beach. And so, yes, I try to get out every day because it makes me feel a whole lot better. I am social distancing and never leaving my yard as long as I consider that saltwater bay to be my backyard. So, yeah.
Absolutely.
Car hasn't started. I started the car up the other day, about a week ago, because I realized it had been 3 weeks since the car had been started. I'm adhering.
So you are feeling those benefits of the outdoors, definitely, aren't you?
I'll try to do an hour a day of kayaking. Yeah, really nice. So yes, the outdoors, and I always feel better.